James Melendez, James All About Business. Today I want to talk to you about a very effective way of communicating, which is through ethos, pathos, and logos. Stay tuned and I'll tell you about this very relevant, ancient, and yet very modern way of speaking to each other. Now be sure to subscribe to my channel. You see the latest videos that I'm producing. If you've already subscribed, thank you so much. Now when I think of persuasion, I think of Aristotle and his three appeals. So Aristotle perhaps was not the first thinker of persuasion, but he was really the first to put these together in terms of ethos, pathos, and logos as one central mechanism, three different ways of getting to a persuasive response. Now, I'll talk about them in a way that I haven't seen on any other video, which is, they're very situational. You can use some of the aspects of some of the ethos, pathos, or logos, or all three of them. It depends on your audience. It depends on what you're presenting. But I think ultimately, when I look at what he's presenting in terms of the ethos, pathos, and logos, the three appeals are very relevant today. In fact, so relevant today that we need to still be studying them. And I created this video because when I see the videos out there on this topical matter, it's really thinking about this as just maybe a persuasive presentation. So it's thinking about this as just presentation only. It is actually much more than that. It's actually interpersonal communication. And so there's a lot of reasons to think about the three appeals when you're making your appeal and trying to persuade people to think about things that you're presenting. Now you see the three appeals here. They are the modes of persuasion. That is the logos, ethos, and pathos. So each of these have their respective areas of responsibility, if you will. So in my college experience, it was given that way versus, this is an everyday way of thinking about how you communicate and all the things you need to get done, and also always persuading someone to do something. I met somebody at a very large company. He was an EVP, a very trailblazing EVP. Now, John said to me one time, James, so I've never been that successful in using the three appeals, the logos, ethos, and pathos. And I said, what do you mean, John? And he said, I think it just took me so much longer to get to those yeses, or perhaps getting people to see my particular vision on something. And I had to think about that for a moment. While I do see him as very successful, he would acknowledge that he is successful. It's also looking at his point of view, which was, I think he would probably talk about this in terms of the cost and difficulty, even the point where he never really got a yes on the things he needed a yes on the most. It's a lifelong learning capability to pick up. So if you're really thinking about this, this is a way of thinking about your career and also thinking about how you can be successful. So I will give you some specific examples in each of these and how they're applied and when to think of. So logos is a Greek word meaning I say. However, it's been translated in terms of this format of logic and rationality, presentation of evidence and facts, diagrams, visualizing data, which is really important, especially in our world today, about the historical context of which a particular item that needs to be, thought about or advanced, maybe a particular action that needs to be taken. So some examples, I think these are really important, and I'm going to say the why on each of these logos. Why is something done the way it is? Or why was that decision made? So you can maybe lean on some facts and figures, maybe some historical context to answer that question to a stakeholder, or perhaps to an individual contributor at a town hall that's asking those questions. Technical proposals, process optimization, addressing technical issues. I also think about this in terms of growth and responsible mindset, as is often delivered in organizations today. So ethos is an important word. It's from the Greek meaning a custom place. But in the context of the three appeals, it really is trust and credibility. It's about the speaker, what they're bringing to the particular presentation. And so does the speaker have trust? Are they credible? Do they have credentials? Do they have a degree? Maybe they're an MD and they're speaking to maybe patient safety. And so that would really help the particular ethos of. So the introduction of that particular speaker is really essential to really help develop and deliver the qualifications of that speaker. The why is really important because it's really based on, the why from that particular, say the doctor, the physician is talking about the why something was done in the past, or perhaps why something needs to change today. There's also organizational town halls, which are really important in terms of exercising that particular need to have the credentials and degrees and experiences. So the speakers that come to the town hall have that and the trust of the organization when they're listening to those speakers. Perhaps there's a need to really develop a change. And so it's not just a formal presentation or speaking in public all the time. It could also be an email, a written communication as well. There's ways of thinking about this in terms of, say, kickoffs are important. Anytime you've been part of a, say, project kickoff, it's the sponsor who's there. That's to give credibility to that particular project. It's to give credibility and a great start for that kickoff for that project. It's also about clean and easy to understand presentations. This is important because if it has a misspelling or there's inconsistencies or the particular message medium of a PowerPoint presentation may not look quite right, your audience may not trust what the speaker is saying. So it has to be leveled out on all ends of that particular presentation. So the way it looks, the spelling, even the speaker and how they show up. So I think this is something that I think a lot of organizations don't think about, and I think this is one way you can think about success points and to use these examples how you might implement them. So when I think of the word pathos, I first thought of this word in terms of knowing this from the Greek, meaning suffering, but it also means something that one undergoes. In the three appeals of Aristotle, it means so it's about emotions, word selection, metaphors, your tone, as well as active listening. It's also looking at cues in your audience to see how people are accepting your message. So your audience member will ask you a question, and that's a good thing, right? But it's also how you respond to them. It's about how other people feel you responded to that particular question that was being asked. So the listeners are listening to you carefully, but it's also your point to look at nonverbal cues to see how your message is registering. There are many examples that I'm going to list here, and you could, when it comes to a job interview, I may need to use a story to sell who I am as a candidate. So the emotion or the pathos can help that particular need for the organization for change management and knowledge management. It's also about current issues. It's about showing that the organization or the leader or leadership team has sense. So I'm going to give you some examples where you might be using the three appeals. Now, the need to use might be a one-on-one communication. Maybe it's with your manager. Maybe it is with a coworker. So maybe you need to convince them to do something, or perhaps you need to have them accept a proposal, but you need to be persuasive in getting that particular appeal heard by that person. There could be a recorded presentation, and I think all those ethos, pathos, and logos should be implemented there as much as possible. Managing your manager. Who doesn't manage your manager? You have to do this quite often. And it doesn't mean your manager doesn't manage you. It just means that sometimes you need to get their support on something. Maybe it's your development plan. Maybe you're applying for another job. There's also leading people you don't manage. Think about all the things you can embed to make your call a success with your investor, making sure that you get to a yes versus a no. So in a project or a plan approval, you really need to make sure you're ticked and tied in every respect. Proposal presentation, again, we get back to, when I have a proposal, I really want to make sure that I've thought carefully about my audience, my subject matter. So I look at any particular stopping point as well. I look at things that someone might ask me and what is my response to that. So I think about an answer to a question that could be a very logical question. You can't think of every response ahead of time. In masterclass, it's a different audience, right? You're there to perhaps persuade them, teach them, help them to understand the subject. Now think about it this way. That particular audience could also be people who think they're better at it than you are. So it's important to own that class. There's no doubt about it. But there's one way of owning it, which is making sure that you've thought about the three appeals in a way that can really register with that particular class, and that you are actually, best in class. Lastly, talking to a large audience, very important to think about this, because not often do we get to talk to a large audience, but if we have that opportunity, we want to make sure that we maximize and optimize that experience. So here's some general tips. I will go through each of these and give some examples or my specific thoughts, but I think this is a great way of thinking about general ideas and tips of improvement for your three appeals. Now, I haven't really heard people talk about specific tips of getting and delivering your three appeals in a way that can be successful to you. Here's some tips that I use and implemented along the way in terms of my particular one-on-one conversations with individuals when I'm making an ask for something. So when I use clear language, it's setting the stage for being understood. It's also making sure that I'm not using acronyms or something that's very difficult to understand. Imagery and presentation. So putting these together with, say, visual data. These are important because I think people need to visualize a particular situation, a problem, a current state. So it's a way that your audience can appreciate the presentation that you're making. Read your audience and know your audience. These two together are really important. So reading your audience, if it's a larger audience, even a smaller audience, is to look at how things you're getting back. Perhaps somebody's arched eyebrows as in a surprise. Knowing your audience, so before you get there, who is in the audience? Avoid too much repetition, as well as avoid cliches. Practice your presentation. I think there's nothing better to practice to get it right than to not practice. Balance with all three modes, the logos, ethos, and pathos. When you do so, it really, I think, is important to think about how one might be more needed than the other, or perhaps two of the three are needed, but the third one is not needed. So think about how you present. I think positiveness is your best resource. It'll carry you a long way. So make your ask. Make sure you actually use those words. I am asking you to approve this project. So maybe you're presenting to a leadership team or a leader, or maybe to a committee member, and you want to make it memorable, actually to any audience member. So maybe they're going to remember how you had that experience, or maybe a particular story, or perhaps your university or college. And the more that people can identify with you, I think the more people are willing to accept your proposal and perhaps really give you that green light that you need. And there's many more applications that you can use, and you could develop your own tips. So thank you so much for watching today. I do appreciate it. I think this is a really important subject matter. I think it's so relevant today in 2021 and beyond. I believe that ethos, pathos, and logos can carry us quite far. It's an effective way of communicating. It's a soft skill in our soft skill tool set that we can make sure that we're utilizing all the time. Thank you so much for watching today. I do appreciate it. Stay tuned for more organizational and business content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and if you already have, thank you so much. I will see you in the next video on James All About Business.